Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of Enforce technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by Enforce technology. Only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit magnagrip.com.
All right. Well, welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monthly. My name is Dan DeGryse. I'm retired out of Chicago about 4 years. I spent 30 years in the fire service and the last 38 in behavioral health. And thanks to fire engineering, Chief David Rhodes, they've given myself and my co-host Chris Muscle the opportunity to host a monthly podcast to really talk about mental wellness and from a positivity standpoint. That's a little bit about the show. We got a wonderful guest, Wendy Norris out of Texas, that started the Texas LODD Task Force. We're going to hear her story, her journey of resilience. And really the title we have today is The Resilience in the Face of Significant Loss. We're going to learn from her, not only from people that she knew, but unfortunately, her own more recent loss of her husband, and how she gets through that and all the other losses that she experiences from, really, I'm going to say a lifetime of providing support for men and women and families across the great state of Texas. And my co-host is Chris Muscle, out of firefighter extraordinaire out of McKinney, Texas. Chris, how you doing?
Good. It's great. The weather's great.
It's beautiful today.
It is.
Anybody that watched our previous recordings probably have noticed something significant. I got a green screen back here because I'm living in my basement, working out of the basement because everybody else has all the rooms occupied. Chris, you got a boom, a mic, you got a whole setup there.
Well,
you're looking good.
Fancy, Dan.
What do they say? If you don't know what you're doing, look good doing it. I even put a little gel in my hair, so.
Good job. I'm not much better because I have a wreck behind me and I had to blur my screen. So, I think Chris has got his act together pretty much out of the three of us.
I would say I'd put some gel in my hair, but I'm kind of running thin on the hair. So, but we're not here to tell jokes. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dan and Chris. It's such an honor to be here and be able to share my story. Thank you for having me. I'm on the other side of Texas from Chris. So we're neighboring sort of, but Texas is so huge. It's like he's in another country. Yep. And you're just out of our country, I think, completely for us down here, Dan. Like Texas is so big.
Listen, I tried to move to west out of Chicago when I retired, and as far west I got is Crystal Lake, where I'm at now. But I would love to get to Texas at some point. I got a lot of friends, you two being part of that. But yeah, you can't just drive 20 minutes to your friend's house because you're in Houston and he's in McKinney, and that's like 18 hours, right?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. It's like a 5-hour plane ride.
Well, Wendy, I'm going to do my very best at doing a little introduction. We've had several conversations. We really only got to know each other in the last, like 5 months or so, thankfully to a mutual friend, Sarah Janke out of NDRI. Everybody knows Sarah. and I'd like to consider us fast friends in a common interest of supporting people. And from what I've learned from you, right? So I'm going to look at my notes here, and I'm not going to tell people when you were born, but you're coming into the second half of a century sometime soon. But you got in the fire service from a mind's eye. Really, you wanted to be a firefighter at the age of 5.
I did.
I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do until I was, I still don't know. But anyhow, yeah. So when you mentioned that to me, that at the age of 5 you wanted to be a firefighter, I thought that was pretty cool. You got into an Explorer program in the 10th grade. And what I thought was really cool, I always tell people I'm the assistant to the assistant to the assistant. You were the assistant to the assistant of the fire chief, which is really true, which is very cool. You got in the fire academy in 92. You were a wildland industrial firefighter. You were in a volunteer fire department in unincorporated Houston, which I don't know if you're still in the same area or not, but we'll get to that. You met your husband when you were skiing, when your friends unfortunately bailed on you back in 95, but your husband, John, and you were married for quite a long time. Shortly after you got married, unfortunately, you had a significant incident on the job that caused an injury that you're lucky to be here with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and the resilience you've been able to find out of that experience. You started the Texas LODD Task Force in technically 99, but if I guess legally, officially says 2000. And since 2000 and 2002, really, and originally you took it over from Firefighter Ministries and evolved into, fortunately and unfortunately, because of the loss of life in the great state of Texas. And I'm assuming probably you've been, and I know you from the National Volunteer Fire Council, that people have reached out to you for your knowledge base as a consultant to support people from a mental wellness, behavioral health, and in a ceremony when people lose their life in the line of duty. Hopefully I didn't miss anything, and I'm not trying to wash over it, but we really appreciate you being here. And first, tell us where people can find you.
Sure. Thank you for that. That was quite the introduction. I feel like I feel more accomplished maybe than I am. I don't know. It's a lot, especially when you mentioned the half century birthday. I was really not feeling all that old until you said that. So I'm not sure. I may need some mental health care after that.
We could cut that out. We could. We'll see what fire engineering does.
No, it's totally good. I mean, it's wisdom in years, correct? So I am blessed so much so to have the experience that I have in all of those years. And you're correct in the aspect of wanting to do it since I was 5 years old. I like to say that I was nosy. And so that's what got me interested in the emergency services world. I come from a military background, and I'm considered the black sheep of that family because everybody else went military for the most part, and I went on the fire service side. But from there, I really just fell in love with all things emergency services and had that blessing. Started out, actually, I like to say that I'm tri-coastal. I was born in the Norfolk, Virginia area, which is where I fell in love with the emergency services, but grew up in the Bay Area of California and started my journey into the fire service itself there when I was an explorer and also starting off my career there. And then, like you said, I met my husband skiing in Utah, and he had the bigger pension with the Houston Fire Department. And so he won that battle, which is great. I love the state of Texas. I got here as fast as I can. I sometimes get made fun of down here for saying I'm from California, but I've had really wonderful experiences from all of those avenues. So yeah, it's been quite the journey so far.
So and you know Chris
Yes.
a lot longer than you know me, and I think it goes back to 2012, 2013.
Oh my gosh, I feel like it was earlier than that, Chris.
Yeah.
You know,
Maybe 2010, somewhere around there.
I want to say 2010, maybe even 2009. You know, life has gone by so quickly. The years have gone by so quickly, especially as you get older. I don't know what that's about, but, you know, it feels like the years go by. And then COVID in the middle of all that were, you know, as first responders, I think zoomed by for a lot of us. And so there's this weird kind of gap in time that prevents us from really knowing when actually something occurred. And once you're part of the organization, it's like, I feel like he's always been there, like since 1999, even though he's not as old as I am. But yeah, I just always remember him being there, but I think it was probably around that time frame. So it's really a blessing also to be on this podcast with Chris. I feel like we had a reunion.
Well, when you get to my age too, everything's like Groundhog Day. It's like new day every day. So you'll see Chris and be like, "Hey, how you doing?" Anyhow, so let's go back to the critical event that happened to you, if you're okay with it, and
absolutely
share. You know, you were in your dream job. You were a firefighter, right? And
yeah,
something happened.
So I loved all aspects of the fire service, and it was definitely a unique experience for me to have a foot in the door in industrial, because that really is not an area where you see a lot of individuals go into the fire service and then much less a female in the fire service going into industrial. When I started my journey into the fire service, coming from the California side of things too, even in the early to mid 90s, females in the fire service were very few and far between. And so thankfully I had two mentors from the fire department that I was in. And that particular agency itself, I believe was one of the first fire departments on the West Coast. And so there was a lot of culture that was there, especially within the volunteer side of things. And they had their career side as well that they eventually put together. And so from that piece in California, just that experience of wildland, volunteering, career, industrial, all of those things really created the foundation of who I was in my fire service career. And so when I came to California, that was one of the areas that I had my career in, was in that industrial piece. But the big thing that was really impressed upon me from that young age was the volunteering aspect of it too, because in industrial or wildland, more so back then than it is now, I think with the WUI aspect of it and that wildland urban interface that's starting to take place now more and more, it wasn't as existent back then as it is now. But I really did want to keep my foot in the door with the municipal firefighting. And so I was a part of a small volunteer agency at the time. And like any other kind of aspect, when we talk about business as a whole, or we talk about organizations or agencies, kind of the downfall or some of the difficulty that we endure in all aspects of things is communication and lack thereof, or, you know, maybe miscommunication. Those type of things is where we see kind of that issue come into play when we see mistakes made or incidents take place. And so that was the case for me as far as my injury, so to speak. And so as a very young firefighter, as a baby firefighter at the time, barely into my career per se, I experienced a career-ending injury. I say, even though I was injured as a volunteer, I really look at the fire service as a whole, volunteer and career as a career per se. And so I was not able to go back and get a paycheck as a firefighter. And so much less being able to volunteer. And it was incredibly devastating when I was told by one of my treating physicians that I would never be able to be a firefighter any longer. So what had happened was I had a roof collapse on a large structure fire and had respiratory burns and a brain injury that took place that I had to really recover from. And it was truly an experience to live through that and became the catalyst for the work that I do now.
Yeah, so thanks for offering that. And we know anytime we ask those questions and people kind of relive it, I'm assuming you could go back there just by talking about it and closing your eyes. At the time that had happened, can I ask, and there's an importance to this because with your task force, you're talking to people in the most critical time of their life where they've lost their loved one. And a lot of times, I'm just going to say people probably lose hope, guidance, their right-hand man or woman, their soulmate. You lost a career like you said early. Did you see any hope at that time? What was the thoughts by Wendy at that point?
Well, let me just backtrack real quick to reply to your statement as far as just going back and remembering, and sometimes that's difficult. I really think that the piece of this is the storytelling aspect, that when we get to share our stories, and for some, definitely that's harder for others and maybe other individuals per se, but this is where we find the healing piece at too, when we're able to share our story, which is a big part of the work that I do, and the ability to find that hope that you are talking about as well. And really in those early days, especially in recovering from the injuries that I had, it was hard. Things were very blurry and dark per se. I am a person of faith, of deep faith. And that became kind of this guiding light for me. And even then, within that first year post-injury, it was hard because I was really having to focus on the recovery aspect of things, but also dealing with significant loss of identity. And I think for many of us that are in the emergency services, and I would even say, Chris, with you being in the military and a military member, I think our identities get so wrapped up in what we do because what we do is very significant. It's incredible that we have this experience of being able to help others and save others and make a difference in the lives of individuals, and that becomes who we are and what we identify as. And so when we lose our identity, or our identity has to change and we have to make a pivot, it's a loss. It's a huge loss, and recovering from that loss is quite difficult. And I think that the biggest learning experience for me was that my injuries cannot necessarily be seen. And so for many people, that was hard. And that was hard for me as well, because I forced myself to do things that I was not ready to do yet on the physical level. And I still have issues with that today. I'm obviously a lot better 27 years later, however many years later that has been. But it still impacts me today, and people can't see that. And I can't necessarily see it, but I feel it. And so that's the hard part that I really had to wrestle with, and figuring out what my identity was while my body was recovering. And I would say that first year, there was not a lot of hope. And that caused me to really have to go inside myself and figure out, okay, what does the future look like for me? Because I'm not giving up on the fire service so soon. The doctor may tell me that I can't do the firefighting, but I'm going to find a way to keep my foot in the door. And that's where eventually the hope started to come through that dark.
Yeah, thanks for offering that. The thing when I got in the fire service, right, I didn't have anybody there to offer me anything. And as I built relationships and friendships, I can't even imagine now, right? I knew nothing. Didn't know how to pull ceiling, let alone get through a traumatic incident. And one of the reasons why Chris and I, we come from different generations, have very similar things, but the importance here is that what the people before me did and what I did and what you did, even, you know, I'm about a decade older than you, but then the next generation, how they get through it could be totally different. We're not saying what I'm not saying. You're sharing. We're asking you how you become and remain resilient in the face of significant loss. And loss could be, right, emotions, people, finances, career, relationships, all these things. And we see loss every single day on the job because of the events that we respond to. So then you see some path that keeps you potentially in the fire service and helping people that have had significant injury. And then you've come to find out more people, unfortunately, are dying in the line of duty, whether it be from cancer, heart disease, or in the act of firefighting. Hundreds and so forth. I don't know how many necessarily in Texas, but you take an organization, what was it called before you took over?
I actually started that organization. It was initially called Firefighter Ministries.
Okay.
Because ministries, when you break down the actual meaning of the word, it means to serve. And so I wanted to be able to serve firefighters. If I could not be a firefighter, I wanted to serve firefighters. And I wanted to come from the aspect of my faith, and being able to integrate spirituality. And that's where, if I kind of fast forward to where I'm at now in the last few years and working on the mental health side of things and working with families of first responders that have died by suicide, we're holistic beings. We've got to be able to take care of ourselves, mind, body, and spirit. And spirit doesn't necessarily have to mean religious. It's our why. It is why we get up every day. It's why we go and do the work that we're doing. And that's a big component of who we are. And so the spirituality piece was big for me to be able to heal myself holistically after that injury, especially on the moral injury aspect, which is another area that I am really focusing on too, because all of a sudden my why was lost. And so in order for me to kind of get past that hurdle was to figure out, okay, how can I serve firefighters and how can I keep my foot in the door? And that's where Firefighter Ministries was born. Was trying to, back in the day of AOL, where you had to plug your computer into the phone jack and fight for time. You know, if your loved one or your family wanted to be on the phone, you had to like fight for time. And that was also when you had to pay per minute. I don't know, Matt, Chris, you're probably too. I don't know if were you around then?
He was playing. He was playing with Legos at that time. Yeah.
Gotcha. But, if you remember, it was a battle. But back in that time frame, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have the constant news cycle. There wasn't a lot of information that was out there. And so my whole goal was to connect firefighters that had catastrophic injuries to resources. And that took a lot of digging around because the resources weren't as available as they are now on the internet. And so that's where my organization was born, was trying to find those resources, but quickly changed within a year and a half to caring for families of the fallen. And I will tell you, that was another grief aspect for me because my heart was really into the injured aspect of things. And to have to swing so far to the other side where we were dealing with line of duty deaths was a loss for me as well, because that's where I really wanted to be. But also I had no idea that would lead me to where I am today following the loss of my own husband. But it really ended up being a life-changing thing for me because when I was working with the injured and then all of a sudden asked to provide assistance to this department that had had their second fatality, I went kicking and screaming into that. I had a fire chief that reached out to me and said, "Hey, we could use some of your assistance." Because at that time I was trying to, or I actually had a sheriff's officer that was trying to help me file for the public safety officer's benefit at the time. And so I was learning a lot about that program as we were going through that. And so this fire chief thought that I could potentially help. I am not sure why. But I went kicking and screaming into that because I felt like I should have died in my incident, because the injury per se for me and what I went through was horrible for my husband and I. We did not have children at the time, but we lost a lot of friends. We went through a lot of hardship because of that: financial strain, friendship strain, social strain, career, all of those things. And so I had felt like if I had died, I would have been honored. My husband would have been honored. He wouldn't have to face the medical bills that I had. And so to me, I had wished at the time that I had died, because it would have been a totally different outcome for my husband.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think you shared with me, because you were in the volunteer side, you didn't have major medical.
Right. There was no workers' comp and there wasn't insurance at the time. And so we had been left with a substantial amount of financial burden from the medical bills of being treated for burns and brain injuries and things like that. So yeah, we had a significant amount of loss all the way around, per se. So I ended up having my perspective completely rearranged when I went up there and took care of this family in this department. And it really opened my eyes that even though that is a physical loss that this family went through, and this firefighter had died, I realized that we are all suffering from something and carry these burdens, and that I could potentially make a difference with this loved one and the children that were left behind, and quickly realized that it would have looked completely different. Even though I was feeling sorry for myself, I had a new perspective of what would have been left behind should I have died for my husband. So it really kind of cleared a lot of things that were fuzzy because of my fuzzy thinking from that perspective. And then that just opened up the doors for us to end up doing probably 95% of the work that we do is with the fallen.
Yeah, and then go to, there was many significant events, right? Every loss of life is significant, but when you and Chris came together, I'm trying to think in the timeline. So 2000, and I'm not trying. So first question is, how many lives do you think you've engaged with since, I'm trying to go back 2000. So 24 years now.
I would say over 1,000 easily, even more so than that. I myself and my team have been able to take care of probably 600 to 800 families, agencies, first responders over those years, in various means and various ways.
Is that all in Texas, or is that throughout the country?
It's mostly in Texas, but we have assisted agencies outside of the state as well. But it's been all over. And really, I think what's fascinating is that when I started kind of looking at things in a different perspective, doors just really started opening and provided me the ability to continue to expand the services that we offered within the organization. And I can go back even to 9/11 as being a significant event for us, and the ability for us to, again, take a hardcore look at loss from before a person dies all the way through years later, because the task force, the Texas LODD Task Force. So we were Firefighter Ministries for a couple of years, and then we ended up changing our name to the Texas Line of Duty Death Task Force. But we were called in to assist with the FDNY hockey team. They had a women and children, a widows and children skating program, and we had a program at the time called Teddy Bears for Tykes. And they asked our organization to come in and be a part of that event. And fortunately, there was a big nor'easter that had blown through. And so that event was canceled. But Ladder 3, the house, adopted us and took us in and did all the things for us for a couple of weeks. And we really got to be a part of ride-alongs and family events and house events and all of that, which led to their significant loss in 9/11. And then we were able to be a part of things for many years afterwards. But that opened up my eyes to mass casualty work, what it looks like to know somebody prior to a death, and then what that looks like for a family after, which led us to the West incident. And that FDNY piece, a little tiny microcosm of that incident for 9/11, really helped me understand what we needed to do when the West explosion happened in 2013. And so I had met Chris at some point before 2013. We may have to go pull up the files, Chris, on that. But sometime before then,
it was 2010.
We had met.
Yeah, 2000.
Was it 2010?
Yeah.
KTA, I believe it was. We a first responder, a firefighter that we both know, had started an honor guard program, and I got to know Chris through him, and what a gift that was. So Chris and I had done some other funeral work and planning work and honor guard work, and he was one of my regional honor guard commanders and did a lot of logistics for us as well. And so when the West explosion happened, 2013 was a horrible year for us in the state of Texas. We had, I believe it was 22 fatalities that year, 3 of those being multiple fatality incidents. So we had the Bryan, Texas incident where 2 firefighters were killed and 2 were significantly burned. And then we had the Houston event where they had multiple firefighters that were killed, one that had a serious injury that died later from his injuries. And then we had the West explosion. And then right after that was Yarnell in Arizona. And so there was quite a few of those incidents. And really leading up to that, we had busy years before then. And just a lot of changes that were going on personally with our team members' lives. I know Chris by the time we hit West, you had your second baby, right?
So my interesting fact, my son, Leighton, who turns 11 next month, my wife was actually in labor with him, and I was coordinating 13 different watches at funeral homes in various places while she was actually in labor from the hospital room during the West explosion. He was born during all that. Yeah.
It was, so you can see, Dan, just the sacrifices our task force members were willing to give. And, we were talking yesterday about this, that it takes a lot for us to even do the work. Like, we are very much impacted by our work as first responders. We're exposed to a lot of things. We have a lot of unique situations that impact our mental health and our wellness and even our physical health as well. And we come away with, we come away changed from this profession. And so then when you take individuals like Chris who are willing to jump into death and grief work and trauma and get in the mix of that, it takes an even more special person to do that, but it takes a significant toll on a person as well. And to have an individual that is in the midst of a wife that was actively laboring and giving birth and having to juggle the needs that we had was just a story that I have never forgotten. And I always share because he missed out on some things that were very important to his family. And so that was a lesson learned for me too, when we talk about mental health and wellness and taking care of our own. And the lessons learned even coming out of the year 2013, but really West itself, was just how important it is that we have boundaries, that we have the ability to understand how to take care of ourselves and take care of each other in different ways and in better ways, per se. I think that was the biggest lesson learned for me coming out of that year, was how do I take care of my own people?
Yeah, no, when you were speaking, I was thinking about boundaries, and people have asked me in my field, why have I done what I've done for the last 38 years? And I go, I guess I really didn't think about it. It was a desire to help somebody else. I think at times I've been successful, and I can't say that I've been successful every single time, but my intent has been to be successful. But nobody ever told me back 20 years ago, let alone even maybe 15 years ago, certainly not 30 years ago, to watch out for your boundaries, make sure you're intentional with your self-care. I think we all know to take care of ourselves, but now when we're exposed to more, there wasn't a class to talk about the boundaries. And because the reality is that you, Chris, everybody that's listening, all were on that team where if they asked for somebody to buckle their shin strap and get in, whether or not you had a hurt arm, shoulder, back, foot, you'd be like, are you ready to go in? You're like, hell yeah, ready.
For sure, yes.
Let's go. But unfortunately, to what demise? How bad is that injury? And you mentioned about where you had some physical injuries, but then you had some unseen. And I won't necessarily go there, but when you talk about boundaries, I'll be honest, from a career service line, those of you that have worked in the volunteer world, my hat is honestly off to all of you then and now. I'd like to think of myself as somebody that has helped more than one person in my lifetime, but I don't know if I never did it. Gosh, I never was in a volunteer world. I have spent a lot of time, days and nights, and missed meals and time with my family, but I've always come from it from a paid aspect. So I respect the hell out of what you and your team from the Texas LODD Task Force have done and will continue to do, going forward. And to speak to, I could only imagine the number of times you've done hot washes, right? After action or discussions, and had the lead and end with, how are you guys doing, right?
Yeah. Well, and let me say on the boundary aspect of it, it's not even boundaries within the job itself. It doesn't matter whether or not you are careered or you're a volunteer, first responder. It's boundaries all the way around, as far as even the activities that we are a part of after we get off shift or after we make the run, and how much you are filling up your schedule in order for you to keep busy or to not think about the things that are bothering you from the work that you are doing. But especially nowadays, maybe not even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, for certainly when I started my career in the fire service, it's so easy to fill our plates with all kinds of things. We want to be involved with everything. And so that can even cause difficulty for us as we try to reacclimate ourselves to family life or our social lives and really take a breather and a breath. And so I think it's important to understand that boundaries are really important for all aspects of our life. And that's where I think, going back to the task force side of things and what Chris was alluding to, when he was trying to do the logistics of finding 13 people from all over the state while his wife was giving birth, our organization is all volunteer run. There's not a paid staff member that's part of our organization. And so that was above and beyond his career as a firefighter at the time. And so there's boundaries when you talk about families. He could have easily said, I'm in the middle of, my baby's crowning, but we can, if we think about even the smaller things in our lives that get in the way of family life or resting and taking care of ourselves, that can impact our mental health and wellness too, which was a big aspect of, that my husband and I talked quite a bit about. And even being a fellow first responder, it was hard for us both, even for me to understand and acknowledge that he needed to have boundaries too. And so really, it's an all-encompassing. It doesn't matter what aspect of the fire service you're in. Boundaries matter.
What do you got to say, Chris?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. It's pretty powerful. I mean, you have to have boundaries, and life ebbs and flows, right? And there was a period where I did, like Wendy said, a lot with her on the task force, and I think I maybe have shared this with you, Dan, or some others, but there came a period where I had to do some things in my life, my personal and my kids and stuff. And so, like Wendy said, I was always there, but I kind of had to take a little bit more of a back seat than a front seat. And I only say that on this show right now because it just kind of solidifies what Wendy's saying about the boundaries, right? And so sometimes selfishly for ourselves, we have to do things to put those boundaries in place. Because if we're not good on the home front, then we're not going to be good to anyone around us, right?
Right. And I would even say, Chris, that I hate to even use that word selfish because it has such a negative connotation to it. And Dan, when you were talking about the self-care piece, we say we know what that means nowadays, but really self-care involves like that boundary aspect and stepping back and realizing it really isn't a selfish thing to be able to take care of ourselves and our family members and our social support circle. In order to better ourselves as first responders, you have to have a strong social support, whatever that looks like for you, in order to be able to do this job healthy and well. Again, on that holistic level, right? And so sometimes that requires us to make a hard choice to step back and pull away from the things that we find important. The work that Chris did within our organization was crucial and vital and important, and he was a valuable member of our team. But also, he had the second baby, right? This was the second child that was born during West. And he had a lot of other things that were going on in his life that required him to step back. But I always tell the story about what Chris did and what other team members did during that time, because I will say that almost everybody that responded to West left broken in a way and had to do a lot of recovery work. And I would say that that was my biggest mistake I am not a person that has a lot of regrets, but I would say that I have a lot of regrets coming out of that because I did not know as much about mental health and wellness at the time. It really wasn't something that we were focusing on even 11 years ago, that we are so now. And hindsight's always 2020, right? But I learned a lot of valuable lessons moving forward and made quite a few changes because I did not want the people that were volunteering their time and having to cross and push boundaries in order to help the families of the fallen get broken again, because this work, in grief work, in death work, is very, very hard and can definitely cause an imprint on your soul that runs deeper than the work that we do as first responders.
Yeah, and I think something. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
No, I was just going to say, because you mentioned it, and Chris, we could go back. Hopefully, this is on the same line as you mentioned self-care. So boundaries is part of the self-care. And we know we have to shower in the morning. We got to sleep. We got to eat. But there's so much more that we have to be intentional about when we are with this. But there was no book or class that we had available back in 2000, 2002, 2004 to go, oh, hey, by the way, when you are doing this, watch out for cumulative stress. There's going to be a multiple different things that are going to pull at your reservoir of wellness. And I'm not going to say no good deed goes unpunished, but when you're there trying to do these good deeds, it like in your wallet, you only have so many dollars. So what does Wendy Norris learn to do to build up her self-care, resiliency backpack?
Well, I will admit I'm still not really good at that. It is a lesson learned. I think we make the worst patients, right? If you're a paramedic, we make the worst patients because we know what to do and how to do it, and we're not going to do it. And that's kind of one of the jokes I always had with my husband. I will make fun of him a lot. I've made fun of him to his face, and I will still make fun of him now. He was a drama queen. And so he would get man flu pretty easily. And even though he was a highly trained, what's that?
Was that during when you had to wash the dishes, or was that sweeping the floor? Or no, never mind.
It was his whole life.
My guy.
Yeah. I mean, he was a highly trained, well-respected, very smart individual as a paramedic on that aspect of things. But when he would come down with a cold, it was like,
yeah, same
what
here.
do I do? I'm like,
That's me. Land the helicopter out front.
Right. So, we make the worst patients sometimes. And that is true of me as well, because this is our lifeblood. It's our family. It's our other family that we want to be a part of, or that we are a part of. And we're afraid of missing out on things. And so it does require intentionality. We have to be intentional. And that is something that I am practicing every day, is being intentional on setting time away, ensuring that I am intentional in setting up time to be with people that I love, that are not part of this world, because our worlds do get so small when we are in this line of work, that it seems like all that we are surrounded by are other first responders and first responder families. And so sometimes it's hard to get out of our heads and our worlds and know that there's things that are happening outside of this world of firefighting. And so it's intentionality is my self-care, and talking to myself and being able to reassure myself that I may be missing out on this particular disaster response, or this particular meeting, or this particular class. But that opportunity is going to come around again. There's going to be something else that I can be a part of, because that's the thing that I think is hardest for me, is to say no to things, because I want to be involved in everything and make a difference. And this, going back to what we were talking about earlier with AOL and not having all of those pieces that we have now, it's so hard to say no. And so a big part of who I am is my spirituality and my faith and my connection to my social structure, people that are outside of the fire service, my child, my daughter who's 16, all of those key pieces keep me connected and keep me in a place of well-being.
Yeah, I know Chris knows this acronym in his group. I learned about it, and you made me you reminded me of it. FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Yes,
and
a huge FOMO.
And I realized that I was a FOMO too when I was on a job and that we had a daily day, right? And you missed a fire.
Right.
So when you're talking about responding to a tragedy, what I think back to is that so in my department, right, we had a lot of chief officers, and some departments only have a few, but regardless of it, many of the chief officers historically believed that the fires wouldn't go out without them there. And a lot of those chief officers, right, they had no water and no axes in their buggy, right, and they still all go out. I've used that as I've said it, and I've used that as a reminder, even when I say it, to say things will get done without me. And that's kept me grounded. I don't know if I've always been able to put that boundary. It wasn't until later in my career where I've been able to say to people, hey, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be there. Maybe Chris should be there. Maybe Wendy should be there.
Mhm.
And I wish I would have developed that earlier, because we all know, it's not necessarily a death by a single cut. It's the death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
And the cumulative effect of stressors that we either intentionally go in front of or unintentionally are exposed to, personally and professionally.
Absolutely. And I think that's the hardest part of what we do, is that just the FOMO part of it. And I wrestle with that every day. Having, the Panhandle fires that we've had, that was so devastating. I was supposed to go on a spring break trip with my daughter, and I had total FOMO because one of my teams were going up there to assist. And here I was thinking I would have so much more fun going to the Panhandle fires than going to Disney. Like, how messed up is that to have that thought process? But that's who we are, right? It's so hard to say that, because we love our work. We get to do incredible, phenomenal, fun things. I mean, it's fun to us. It may not be fun to the general public, but it's exciting. We get a rush out of it. We're with our other family. There's so many things that go with it. And so it makes sense that we're pulled between two different worlds. And that's where, again, I have to say, the world's going to go on without me. I don't want it to, but
so what is the drive behind your continued efforts with the task force that you built?
So, as you had alluded to in the beginning of the podcast, I had never imagined, but in a way I kind of did, that I have experienced now the line of duty loss of my husband just a short time ago. It's been about 4 months now. And I never really thought that I would not necessarily have bookends, because that means that our organization is done. The work that we're done. We have like the beginning incident with my injury, and John's death is certainly not the end of what we do. It's kind of in that middle piece of it. But I now have a very unique and personal story to be able to take care of the families that come into our organization in a much better way. I like to joke around, or I did like to joke around, that I've always had this kind of complex about not going to college and getting a degree. I kind of kick myself at that because there's so much importance that seems to be put onto that right now. It seems like you can't get certain certifications or whatnot without these degrees, right? And so I have always joked around that I should have a PhD in grief and loss and helping families of the fallen because of the 25 plus years of experience, until I lost my own husband and realized I maybe had a middle school level of experience. And I have told several of the survivors, I'm so, again, blessed that I have done this work for so long, because it gives me a unique perspective. And I have a lot of people that have come around me that I've journeyed alongside of, that have now come up to journey alongside of me. But I have told several of them, I feel like I was an imposter. I had no idea what I was talking about when I was coming alongside of you. And they've gently reminded me that I knew what I was talking about. I just have a different level of knowing now what I am talking about. And it's still all very new. It only happened, like I said, 4 months ago, and the journey is continuing forward, but it also is the catalyst for me to continue the work that we do with the organization. And it's now part of John's legacy. The aspect for him, his passion, other than having a midlife crisis and wanting to go into wildland work at 55, was teaching and education. And he was really big into that piece of it. And so being able to be on a podcast like this and being able to teach and being able to instruct and present is a legacy aspect for me on his behalf now. And then being able to serve these families that are incoming in the days and months and years to come is part of his legacy as well. And knowing loss from a different piece. Now, I've known loss from a lot of different aspects. But now I have another piece of loss to be able to make this organization better and propel me forward in that mission of assisting these families and agencies.
Yeah, Wendy, they, being on, I can't even begin to imagine being on the other side of it, knowing you for a long time and,
right.
Walking through those shoes. But I can only imagine that as you continue to move on, the task force is only going to become that much stronger because of being on that side of it, right? Versus being the responder side of it. And I think something, obviously John was pretty involved with the task force. And I think something else that's pretty unique to the line of duty death task force that we don't think about a lot is it's the after fact, right? The line of duty death event happens, fire department shows up, big, beautiful funeral service, all of this. And then 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, right? And that's one thing that you guys do pretty well is your job just doesn't stop once the funeral's over.
Right. We got to keep, we have to keep going with the work that we do in our lives that we lead and the people that we serve. And life goes on, and it's hard for people to understand that are going through loss and grief and the things that they have been through. And I can't look at myself any different from that, because for me, the hardship is there's people that have it worse. There's people like we just literally had a fatality up in the Panhandle a couple of weeks ago. And I look at that family and that agency different. I feel like they deserve more. And I don't know, I think that's just the serving nature, but I have to go back and realize life has to go on for everybody around me. But I also get a chance to take care of myself and recognize my loss and be able to help myself and help my daughter and care for the needs of my own fire department that have been deeply impacted by this as well. And so, yes, moving forward is a really critical part of the work that I do, but also in my own healing and my own ability to have lessons learned as well.
Yeah. Has your boundaries has changed at all since John's passing? Has it, I guess, your involvement with the fire department? I know you also volunteer. I know you run the line of duty death task force. You do a lot of other things. You do a lot of things. How has it changed since?
Intentionality is huge. I have to be very intentional in understanding my own reactions, understanding my own body. I like to push myself. Again, what I was saying earlier about not having the ability to see my injuries, I do that as well with my grief, and I do that with the physical responses that I have following John's loss. I did not understand the exhaustion that comes from loss, and I had no idea just all that is involved with the after legalities and probate and transitioning into single parenting, even though we really single parented a lot because both of us deployed quite a bit. We had, obviously very different schedules when you're a first responder. It's not the average 40-hour work week that we had. But when you actually become a single parent, that takes a whole nother shift. And so I would say that I am just as busy, but I've had to learn to really balance it out with rest and be intentional on rest and be intentional on taking just some time away for that self-care in order to be able to continue to push forward. But I will also say, Chris, too, it's incredibly healing for me to continue on in this work too. It is incredibly healing for me to be surrounded by the people that I work with and can deploy with and go be a part of incidents and responses and things like that. So I would say things have not necessarily slowed down. They just look a little bit different. Yeah.
So you mentioned intentionality a couple of times, and I think that's so powerful for people to hear, especially in the regards to self-care, right? And whatever the intentionality looks like, whether it's a routine every day, it's making your bed every morning, it's spending an hour quiet time. I know for me in my own journeys, like I go to counseling every week, once a week, whether it's a good week, bad week, good month, that's my intentionality. Right. And so I think there's power, and it doesn't have to be some crazy, I have to go on a 4-hour trip or I have to go to a 3-hour doctor's appointment. It could a walk down the street, sit in the car, sit in the driveway and read a book, play back, whatever it is. I think intentionality creates routine, and routine creates healthiness. Right. So I think there's a lot of power in that.
Well, that reminds me of is it an analogy where they talk about the butterfly effect, that one little choice can make a whole difference in a life. Think that the difference, if I had not, because my friends bailed on me for that ski trip, if I had stayed home, that one little choice, I would not have the life that I have right now. If I didn't have that injury, I wouldn't have my daughter, because, our family looked very different post that. So there's things that happen because of these little choices that we make every day. But when we think about that from the aspect of being intentional with our lives and intentional with the choices that we make and caring for ourselves, our outlook and our health and our wellness holistically can look very different 10, 15, 20 years from now. We don't know until we reach that point. We look back on our lives, hindsight is 2020, with the changes and choices that we make. We are here today because of those choices. And that can be true as well for the choices that we make to take care of ourselves on a mental, physical, and spiritual way too. So those tiny little intentional choices, like stopping your scrolling for, an hour just to be able to escape, or like you said, taking a walk or going and seeing a therapist. All of those things seem very little, but can make up a great effect later on down the line in your life to be a healthier firefighter and person in your career.
I appreciate that answer. It made me think about, our appetites, right, in the fire service are enormous, right? We want the next incident, we want the next run, we want to be the busiest company, we want to be on, you get promoted, all that stuff. You want to be busy, and if your want is greater than your appreciation for what you've achieved, you never, in my own experience, I'll say this because my wife many times will say, look at what you have accomplished. And then the first couple of times I'm like, quit telling me how to drive my car. Let me decide. And I've been in several major car accidents. Thankfully, I'm still alive, and that's not even including my drive of life. But thanks to her, she, kind of like what you just said, I've been able to stop and be intentional about, okay, this may not have happened. I may not have achieved this, but what have I succeeded in? And it's really, which is amazing. Everybody has that ability to, and I'll be like a kid at times right now saying, just take a time out, right? You don't have to meditate. You don't have to go and run 100 miles. You don't have to build the Empire State Building like Chris is saying. Sometimes we believe we have to change the world's motion on the axis. No, a simple thing of just taking a second and appreciating, hey, I woke up this morning, I feel pretty good, I got some decent sleep, and now what else do I want to do? Not everybody's called to what you're doing. I'm gonna, and we're coming on to that golden hour, right, of conversation. I really appreciate everything that you've offered and shared, and just a couple of things I want to reiterate. You, without us asking, talked about boundaries. You shared about self-care. You talked about intentionality. Mental wellness doesn't happen by accident. You have shared that you have set some limits. in the face of significant loss, both personally, career-wise, family-wise, and mission-wise. Some people may be looking at you and going, I call bullshit. I don't like swearing, and well, not on public TV, but they may be looking at you going, Wendy, come on. There's no way that you're still managing in this. I've talked to you a couple of times since we've gotten become friends, text you at times just to check in, small stuff. But hearing you talk, I believe you, but some people might be going, come on, Wendy. So is this really you?
I guess that's a question, huh? That wasn't a rhetorical one, huh? I will tell you that, again, the 50 years, I turned 50 this year. And I will tell you, I've not always been this way. I will tell you that I too, following 2013, was a broken individual coming out of that year. And I was in a completely different headspace in 2014 than I am in 2024. And that is because I have had a lot of growth. I've done a lot of introspection. I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of work with chaplaincy. I've done a lot of work on educating myself. I've done a lot of work on myself, and I've done a lot regarding exactly what we've talked about today with intentionality and boundaries and rewording things. Going from the selfish to it's not selfish to want to step back and say no every once in a while. That's taken 10 years for me to be able to do that. So if you had this conversation with me 10 years ago in 2014, and my whole world seemed to be falling apart because the people that I loved and were part of my organization and part of our department, all of these different aspects all seemed to be falling apart during that time frame, and realizing just how what I had done, the choices that I had made, and decisions that had happened, maybe attributed to other people being hurt, was devastating for me. And so I think you would have gotten a totally different Wendy 10 years ago. But age and wisdom and introspection and boundaries, all of those things have allowed me to come to this place where I am now. And it's not always easy, Dan. It's, something could still kind of set me off, or something could really throw a wrench at me and get me down, or I may not be as bubbly or tearful or whatnot. We're all human beings at the end of the day. We all still suffer. All of us have been through significant loss. If you are in this job, whether volunteer or career, you have been exposed to a level of loss that not many people experience. And being able to connect and do the work on yourself and do the things that we've talked about throughout this podcast, you can make yourself stronger. You can give yourself the ability to bounce back and find that resilience. It's work. It does take work, and it does take having people around you that hold you accountable and tell you, Chris, go be with your wife as your baby's coming out. So sometimes you just need people to say no. And sometimes you need people to say, get out of bed and keep going. And so that's where I'm at today, as opposed to even 10 years ago.
Well, Wendy, I really appreciate you coming here and sharing from your heart your life, and not only just with Chris and I, and again, Chris has known you for a lot longer than I have, but hopefully this conversation has helped support people, what they're doing out there from a mental wellness standpoint. And again, this, the title of this, right? Resilience in the face of significant loss. And we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day in the great state of Texas, or in your life, or anywhere. So appreciate everything that you've done. And hopefully, I think with the help of Sarah Jenke and some friends, we might be working together more often. Just want to say thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me,
Chris.
It's been an honor.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks, Wendy, for coming on.
And I realized I did not answer your first question. I went right into the story. You can find me at the Texas LODD Task Force.com. You can find me there. My email address and everything is on there. So if you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. I'll be able to answer any questions or talk more about this.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Quite the honor.
Get on the website and send you an email, and you'll respond.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, for all of you that are out there, thanks for joining us. Our special guest, Wendy Norris from the Texas LODD Task Force. Be well out there until we see you again.
Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by enforced technology. Only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit magnagrip.com.